Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast, and welcome into Week 1. This is our first Friday in-season show of the year. Very exciting time. I am joined by Derek Brown, Matthew Friedman, Andrew Erickson. We got the whole crew here today talking a little Week 1 action and a little recap of Thursday Night Football sprinkled in there as well. Guys, we have a ton to get to, so I don't want to take too long in the preamble, but it's just such an exciting time. I have to ask you, Friedman, how awesome is it to be here in Week 1 finally?
It's great. Week 1 is fantastic. We actually have some data that we've seen in Thursday Night Football. I mean, it wasn't a fun game to watch, but Cooper Kupp was awesome. Some of the big players played, and Allen Robinson, not so good for him. Played all the snaps, ran all the routes, had only 2 targets. That feels like a problem, and maybe people should have seen this coming.
Yeah, some people did see this coming, as you are well aware. I guess the nicest thing you could say about Allen Robinson is he did, in fact, participate in a game of football last night. Erickson, how are you feeling here, one game into the season?
I don't feel great about Cam Akers because he doesn't have a starting job as the Los Angeles Rams starting running back, so that's unfortunate. But Gabe Davis, I like Gabe Davis, and he played well, so excited about that.
Yeah, the victory laps were out in full force, not even 5 minutes into the game, as to be expected, considering that Davis was like one of the hot button issues of the entire summer. D-Bro, what was going through your mind when you watched Davis score that early touchdown?
Vindication and suck it was the first 2 words that came into my mind. So I'm totally here for it.
We're getting some saucy D-Bro here today. Like I said, this is our first Friday show of the season, so just to explain what that's going to mean all year long, this is our matchups show. We're going to go through some key matchups, individual players, positional units, whatever we're expecting to see that's going to pay off in a big way this upcoming weekend. During the slate of games, we're going to be doing this every single Friday with all 4 of us, so be excited for a fun year with that. Before we jump in, I want to take a quick moment to tell you guys about My Playbook's Autopilot tool. Autopilot makes it incredibly easy to manage your lineups across all your leagues. It sends emails on suggested lineup changes, can auto-swap inactive players for you. You can even turn on full autopilot to have your optimal lineup set automatically each week. Automate your lineup management for all your leagues with Autopilot over at fantasypros.com/myplaybook. You have to be an MVP or Hall of Fame subscriber to use Autopilot. So if you're not currently a subscriber, we've got an amazing offer that gets you premium for 6 months without paying us a dime. You can check out that deal at fantasypros.com/offers. Guys, like I said, we have a ton to get to, so we'll jump right into the Sunday early afternoon slate here. Game 1 is Saints at Falcons. Not only is this our first game we're going to be talking about, it is also our first pick in the Over-Under Challenge. The Over-Under game is sponsored by No House Advantage, who are giving away $10,000 in weekly and season-long prizes, including a grand prize of $3,000. Check them out today at nohouseadvantage.com or download the app on the app stores. Use promo code PROS at sign-up for a first deposit match up to $50. Our first Over-Under Challenge of the day and the season is Jameis Winston. Will he go over or under 18.5 fantasy points against the Falcons? Friedman, you're up first.
Yeah, going under 18.5. The Falcons have a great perimeter in terms of cornerbacks. A.J. Terrell, Casey Hayward, so tough matchup for Winston. New wide receiver unit that he's working with. All the wide receivers are good, but still new wide receiver unit. And Michael Thomas is still limited in practice, so not guaranteed that he's 100% for this game. I will go under.
Under for Friedman. D-Bro, what about you?
I'm going to take over only because I think with these cornerback matchups on the outside, if these wide receivers can win, it could be a productive day for Winston.
Erickson?
I'm going under. Second lowest total on the slate at 43 points, and Winston only went over this number twice in the 6 games he played last year, and in those 2 games, he threw at least 4 touchdown passes. So unless he's throwing like 4 touchdown passes in week 1, I don't see him going over this number.
2 unders, 1 over. I'll say over as well for no other reason than to make it even and make it that more difficult for fans to make their own choice. The guys will share some of their other favorite over-unders from this week's challenge throughout the show. For now, let's turn to D-Bro for his key matchup in Saints-Falcons.
Like I said, this matchup comes down to the Saints wide receivers versus these Atlanta corners. With Casey Hayward and Terrell on the outside, it's a revamped unit. We know how good Terrell was last year. Hayward shows that he still has juice in the tank. The guy allowed a 50% catch rate and a 76 passer rating. So Michael Thomas, Olave are going to see these guys on the outside. Where I think Winston can succeed is if he hyper-targets Jarvis Landry in the slot, because Isaiah Oliver or Darren Hall have not been good. Both guys gave up 96 or higher passer ratings last year. So the key to Winston having a good game is both Olave or Thomas winning their matchups and Landry just eating underneath.
Do you think Olave is going to have a big early game here or instant impact?
I think it's possible because the parts of last season where you saw Casey Hayward struggle was against young wide receivers or guys with speed that can stretch the field. The only 2 games he gave up 90 or more yards in coverage last year was when he saw Michael Gallup and then the combination of Jalen Guyton and Mike Williams. So it's in the range of outcomes for Olave to just blow out the gate here and Winston to hit him deep.
Freeman, what matchup are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the guys I'm really looking at in this game are on the Falcons, Kyle Pitts and Cordarrelle Patterson. I'm assuming that rookie wide receiver Drake London will play, but he's been limited in practice on Wednesday and Thursday. We're going to want to see the practice report on Friday, but I think this Atlanta offense in the beginning runs through Pitts and C-Pats. You know, Pitts is going against 2 good safeties in Teron Matthew and Marcus May, but both are new to the defense. Obviously, with his draft capital, his elite athleticism, Pitts could be the tight end 1 next year. I'm curious to see how he does against these 2 guys. And then Cordarrelle Patterson, he's I think he's the starter, but the Saints have a top 6 defensive line and linebacking unit, so he could struggle. But last year, before his ankle injury, he did have 136 yards against the Falcons. So I will be curious to see how he does and how they use him.
Yeah, Pitt's obviously a guy that everybody's all in on this season. He doesn't have the easiest matchup to start, so I just want to say don't smash the panic button for anybody if you invested a lot of early draft capital in him and he doesn't get off to the best start that you were hoping for. Erickson, who's your key matchup?
I'm just looking at Alvin Kamara versus the Falcons defense, the defense that he has traditionally just absolutely owned. You know, dating back every single year, it just seems like Kamara against the Falcons is an absolute layup of a matchup. You look at the 2 matchups last year against the Falcons, Kamara was a top 12 running back in both appearances. Now, in both those games, Mark Ingram was not either on the team or was not active in those games. So I'm interested to see how they distribute touches because we saw Kamara's touches go down 24 to 15 when Mark Ingram was in the lineup last year. But the Saints also know that they may not have Kamara next year, because of the suspension. So I think they're going to ride him out here, and I think that it's as simple as it's going to be the Kamara week here for the Saints offense.
Game 2 on our slate is a revenge game. Browns at Panthers. Friedman, what are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the key matchup here. Baker Mayfield and the Panthers pass catchers going against this Browns secondary. Now, let's just assume Christian McCaffrey does CMC-like things. When healthy, he has the highest ceiling floor combination out of everyone in the league. But Mayfield against the Browns, this is what matters. This is the revenge game for him, but the revenge game for them as well, especially for that defense, which was number 3 last year in yards per play. And in our unit power rankings has the number 3 secondary in the league. They're deep at cornerback with Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, Martin Emerson. Greedy Williams might not play in this game, but Emerson could slot in. I think they would be fine. They're also deep at safety with John Johnson, Grant Delpit, and Ronnie Harrison. And they're supported by edge rushers Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney. I think the secondary has a massive edge over these Panthers pass catchers. The secondary is number 3. The pass catchers for the Panthers, number 22 in our rankings. And DJ Moore, he's great. Awesome. The Panthers after him are incredibly thin and unproven. Robbie Anderson, Terrace Marshall, Rashard Higgins, Laviska Shenault, Shai Smith. We don't even know which one of these guys is actually going to be on the field. And then their tight ends, Tommy Tremble and Ian Thomas, are basically non-entities. On top of that, Denzel Ward is a really good perimeter cornerback, and he could shadow DJ Moore. And Moore, as much as I love him, I think it's a really tough matchup for him. So bad matchup for Baker. That could limit what Moore and CMC are able to do unless they just get all of the targets. And it's worth remembering, head coach Matt Rule 1-6 against the spread and on the money line as a home favorite. This is just not a good situation for the Panthers.
For Friedman, really quickly, I know I said it sort of tongue-in-cheek, but Baker Mayfield does seem like the type of player, if there was any player in the NFL that's going to really hold on to a grudge and might actually want to show up in a big way for a revenge game. Does that weigh into your projection at all?
Not really. I mean, it's 1 against 52 guys who feel like they should get revenge on him.
That's a great point.
Freeman does not have a grip meter. Sorry, does not exist.
No, he doesn't care about that dog in him. Erickson, who's your key matchup here?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the Browns pass catchers here against the Carolina defense between Amari Cooper and David Njoku. Now, Amari Cooper is they paid him like he'd be the number 1 wide receiver there, but there is no Deshaun Watson, and you have Jacoby Brissett. And I'm afraid of Amari Cooper in this matchup against a guy like a J.C. Horn. He didn't play a lot last year, just played 3 games, but number 1 in yards per route covered. He allowed 1 catch in just 3 games played. We've seen Cooper get locked up by stud cornerbacks before, and quarterbacks just look in the other direction. Carolina allowed the 4th fewest receiving yards, 3rd fewest targets to wide receivers last year. So I think this is going to be an Njoku week. I think that they're going to feed the tight end. Jacoby Brissett, when he was a starter with the Indianapolis Colts, it was the Jack Doyle show. That's what we saw. And Cleveland's offense traditionally top 3 in target share to the tight ends over the last 2 seasons. So I'm really interested to see Njoku actually get a lot of action in this particular matchup. And I think Amari Cooper, he struggles outdoors traditionally. I think it could be a long day for him.
Devro, you're also looking at the Browns offense.
Yeah, for me, I think that this game and the Cleveland offense is going to run through the backfield. And I know that's not earth-shattering because we all know Brissett is under center, but I think it's a good matchup for them to do so. Now, you look at Carolina's run defense, it was basically a tale of 2 halves. Last year, at the beginning of the season, first 9 games, 27th in explosive run rate. Now, towards the back end of the season, they tightened up. They were 16th. But if we see that their struggles rear their ugly heads again, and you have 2 rushers in Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt that were top 10 last year in both true yards per carry and breakaway run rate, Cleveland could just shove the ball in their stomachs and let them explode upfield the entire game, and the Carolina Panthers might not be able to do much of anything against it.
Game 3, Steelers at Bengals. Erickson, what's your key matchup here?
Yeah, I'm looking at the Bengals' revamped offensive line against the Steelers' run defense. So they added La'el Collins, Alex Kappa, Ted Karras here, and the Bengals last year were able to run the ball down the Pittsburgh Steelers' throats. You looked at Joe Mixon, 46 carries for over 250 rushing yards in the 2 matchups they had last year. So I could see the Bengals going in with a similar approach. They don't necessarily need to throw the ball across the yard. I know a lot of us are projecting Joe Burrow in this Cincinnati Bengals passing attack to pick up the pace, but it may not be here in week 1. Why expose Joe Burrow to the Steelers' fierce pass rush, which is their strength on their defensive line, when they still have major holes, ranking 32nd against the run last season. So I still think that we could see a big game here from Joe Mixon, and I don't necessarily think this is the exact matchup where we're going to see Joe Burrow drop back 40 times and just sling the ball to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So for those reasons, I like Jamar Chase on the under for his fantasy points.
Erickson is a real football guy when instead of picking Jamar Chase or T. Higgins or Deontay Johnson, he goes an O-line versus a D-line as his key matchup on the very first game that he's given his key matchup for. Friedman, who's your matchup you're looking at here?
Yeah, I'll take the low-hanging fruit and go with Jamar Chase. And I'm going against Erickson. I'm taking the over 15.5 fantasy points in the no-house advantage over-under contest. Offensive Rookie of the Year, one of the greatest first-year pass-catching campaigns we've ever seen. I like him to be Offensive Player of the Year at 30-1. He's going against the Steelers secondary without 2021 number 1 cornerback Joe Hayden. And I'm also looking at this game at the Steelers offensive line. I just want to see what it looks like. The question is not if it's bad. The question is how bad is this unit? It's number 31 in our unit power rankings right now. Maybe they surprise a little bit. Maybe they're just slightly below average. And if that's the case, that has a huge impact on the rest of the Steelers offense and what we can expect out of the skill position players.
Debro, talk to me about the skill position players on the Steelers offense.
Well, first of all, I'm going to take the under on Jamar Chase. I'm siding with Erickson on this one because I'm scared of the Pittsburgh corners. But the other matchup that I'm looking at for this game, and Deontay Johnson, we know he's banged up. We don't know if he's going to play. This all leads me to Chase Claypool and big slot season. You look at Cincinnati, and they gave up a ton of production through the slot last year. Mike Hilton is terrible. 69% catch rate, 100 passer rating. Cincinnati overall versus slot wide receivers, the 8th most receptions, 10th most receiving yards, and the 8th most fantasy points per game. Claypool could be the tip of the spear for Trubisky this week, regardless of whether Deontay plays or not, because he could catch a shadow from Chidobe Awuzie on the outside.
Let's move to game 4. By the way, it's just so fun to have a full slate of games to be moving and jumping between. I'm just so excited that football is back in our lives. Friedman, who is your key matchup for 49ers at Bears?
All right, well, I would want to say Trey Lance. He was the quarterback I was targeting in drafts all offseason. But if I didn't get him, Justin Fields was the next quarterback I was going after. And he's the guy I want to look at in this game, looking at Fields versus the 49ers secondary. The 49ers are without starters, cornerback Jason Verrett and Jimmy Ward. Both of those guys are injured. And in the offseason, they lost cornerback Josh Norman, Kwan Williams and also safety Jaquiski Tart. And as bad as the Bears offense was last year, it wasn't much worse in dropback expected points added, number 29, than was the 49ers defense, which was number 23. And based on our Fantasy Pros unit power rankings, Fields isn't at a massive disadvantage against the 49ers secondary. He's number 23. The 49ers secondary is number 18. He has a tough matchup because obviously the 49ers have great defensive line, great off-ball linebackers. He's going to be pressured, but he was the number one dual threat quarterback as a high school recruit. We saw last year that he has the scrambling ability to get out of the pocket and to pick up chunk yardage on the ground. And he probably has the weapons in Darnell Mooney and tight end Cole Kmet to be able to attack the 49ers down the field and between the numbers. So, I'm not going to put too much stock in preseason performance, but Fields looked good. Like, he looked good in August. He looked better than all of the other second-year quarterbacks in his class. It's not unthinkable for a first-round quarterback to take a significant step forward in his second season, and I think we see that from Fields in week one against a secondary that is banged up and lost a lot of players in the offseason.
Debro, sticking with the Bears offense, what matchup are you looking at?
I am staying far, far away from David Montgomery. People, good luck. That's all I could say. Versus the San Francisco defensive line, last year they just shut down every single running back. Second in adjusted line yards and second level yards. They had the 7th fewest rushing yards allowed last year. And even if you're looking for checkdowns for David Montgomery, they were 4th in DVOA versus receiving backs. So I want none of the David Montgomery smoke this week.
Erickson, the other guys took the Bears offense, but the 49ers offense is really one of the most intriguing units that we have to sort of see what they're going to look like this season. What are you looking at here?
I'm looking at their RB1, Elijah Mitchell, in his last 8 starts for the 49ers as their starting running back. 21.6 carries, average 83 rushing yards per game. I mean, I think that the 49ers are going to be able to do what they want on the ground against this Bears front, and I expect Elijah Mitchell to be very productive. He's healthy right now, and I think that they're going to run him to the ground until he can't run anymore.
Game 5, Eagles at Lions. Erickson, what are you looking at here?
I'm looking at the Eagles rushing attack versus this Lions defense. In this game matchup last year, we had it finish 44-6. It was a big win by the Philadelphia Eagles. They were basically able to do whatever they wanted on the ground. It was Jalen Hurts. It was Boston Scott. It was Jordan Howard. Like, all of these dudes were just running all over the Lions defense. It's the number 1 matchup per PFF's offensive defensive line matchup chart. So I like Miles Sanders a lot in this spot. He's coming in healthy. He's missed some time with a hamstring injury, but by all accounts, he should be good to go. And when we saw Miles Sanders during the preseason with the first team, he got all the reps. He was in there with all the snaps with A.J. Brown, with Jalen Hurts, Devonta Smith. And I expect him to be the number 1 running back here in this matchup. It's a great spot for him. We know he's explosive and efficient when he has the ball and when he's healthy. So I think he's going to get the opportunity here. And maybe, just maybe, he may score a touchdown for the first time in it seems like forever.
We can only hope. So in the notes, you wrote Eagles rushing attack. Does that mean you also like Gainwell, or is this more of just a Miles Sanders play?
No, I mean, it's really just Miles. I mean, Kenneth Gainwell, what we've seen from the preseason usage is that he may not even be in front of Boston Scott. Gainwell really seems more like they're going to use him if the Eagles are forced into a shootout where they need to throw more specifically. If they fall behind, they could see more of Gainwell. But to me, Boston Scott is the direct backup to Miles Sanders as a runner, whereas Kenneth Gainwell is kind of coming in as a breather back, change of pace back, and used more in the passing game.
Debro, where are you looking for this game?
It's the beginning of Jalen Hurts MVP season, baby. The campaign starts, and I think it's going to be on the back of A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert. Against a Lions secondary that was terrible versus deep passing, 6th in completion rate allowed, most deep passing yards in the NFL, A.J. Brown is going to eat them alive. He was 12th in passer rating on deep targets last year, and Dallas Goedert gets a secondary that was 29th in DVOA, gave up the 2nd most receiving yards to tight ends last year. Jalen Hurts, if he's not getting freaky in the open field in this game, it's just going to be pew, 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 just tossing darts to both of these guys.
Freeman, how about you? Where are you looking?
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment of both the guys. I'm going to look on the other side of the ball for the Detroit Lions, looking specifically at DeAndre Swift and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Both of them flashed on offense last year for the Lions. With Swift, I think the question is how many carries? Like, does he get enough carries in normal game scripts to be a real lead back? How much work does he lose to Jamal Williams? He's got a tough matchup for sure against the Eagles defensive line that I think we have in the top 6. And then St. Brown crushed in the final 6 weeks of the season, 560 yards yards, 5 touchdowns on 67 targets. It's unlikely he sees that kind of volume, but he does enter the season as the number 1 wide receiver with Jameson Williams on the sideline. And the Lions, home underdogs in a dome. Home underdogs in a dome. Go get it. Like, show us that last year wasn't a fluke. I think he's a real number 1 wide receiver. I hope he shows it.
Grit.
Friedman's excited about that game. Debro, are you excited about our next game, Jags at Commanders?
I'm supposed to say yes right here, right? That
Come on, it's a revenge game.
It is. It's a revenge game. But the first matchup that before we get to all the revenge and things of that nature, I like Antonio Gibson versus this Jaguars run defense this week. And the thing about the Jags run defense is which version of them do we see come out the gate? I mean, last year was a tale of two halves. Like, weeks 1 through 9, they were 13th in success rate allowed, second lowest explosive run rate allowed. The back half of the season looks like it could be a really good matchup for Antonio Gibson. They were 9th in rush EPA, 12th in success rate, and 17th in explosive run rate. So if they want to make sure that Carson Wentz does not implode this week, could be just hand the ball off to Antonio Gibson.
Erickson, how about you for this game?
I'm looking at some of the playmakers on both sides of the ball. So Travis Etienne, James Robinson is entering with the Achilles injury. He's supposedly going to play, but how much volume he's going to get, I think, is a question mark. And I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball effectively against a very stacked Washington front. So I think Etienne's going to eat in the passing game here. And then Christian Kirk on the other side of the ball. Number 1 wide receiver, at least they paid him like a number 1 wide receiver. But when we saw him in the preseason with Trevor Lawrence, 36% target rate per route run. So I expect Kirk to see a lot of balls in this matchup.
Friedman, how about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, the revenge narrative is obviously Carson Wentz going against his former head coach, Doug Peterson. That's too easy. That's too easy to talk about, so I'm not going to talk about it. Instead, I'm going to look at Trevor Lawrence because he's the quarterback who really matters in this game. For the Jags, it's all about Trevor Lawrence. Last year was a disaster under Urban Meyer. This year, the team added head coach Doug Peterson, wide receiver Christian Kirk, tight end Evan Ingram, the return of running back Travis Etienne. So the Washington defense isn't imposing. Let's see the guy who was drafted number 1 overall last year. Let's see him do it. And then for the Commanders, I want to see first-round rookie wide receiver Jahan Dotson. He's available in a lot of leagues. Go pick him up, stash him. He ran with the first team in the preseason. He had good reviews from training camp. He has draft capital and college production. The Jags were a bottom 2 pass defense last year. Dotson could be one of the most productive rookie wide receivers this year, and it could start in week 1.
So Friedman's he's intrigued by Justin Fields, second-year quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, second-year quarterback. Our next game is Colts at Texans. Are you also intrigued by Davis Mills?
Of course. This is a gross game, and so I go with the grossest matchup I can find. Jonathan Taylor, so obvious. Why would I want to talk about him? I want to see this Texans offense, and obviously Davis Mills going against this Colts secondary. And the secondary is not going to look like last year's unit. They still have Kenny Moore in the slot, but perimeter starters, Xavier Rhodes and Rock Ya-Sin, they're gone. Backup TJ Carey, he's gone. At safety, the Colts last year had 5 players who had 100 snaps at safety. 4 of them are now gone. And the big loss, defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus. He's now the head coach for the Bears, and they've replaced him with Gus Bradley, who is a master of mediocrity. He is now in his 3rd coordinator job in as many years. It's not a great situation for this Colts secondary. They did add number 1 cornerback Stephon Gilmore. That's a great addition, but he is 32 years old in September. He could start to slow down. They added on the perimeter cornerback Brandon Fashion, who's a Bradley favorite. He knows the system from their time together with the Chargers and Raiders, but he's a total liability in coverage. 1.33 yards per coverage snap allowed for his career. Bradley doesn't seem like the kind of coordinator who can quickly pull together a secondary with that much turnover. And as for Mills, he finished his 2021 rookie season on a 5-game hot streak after returning to the starting lineup in week 14, over 1,200 yards passing, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a 7.9 mark of adjusted yards per attempt. He could be even better this year. Quarterbacks typically progress in their second season, and he does have continuity with offensive coordinator Pep Hamilton, who was his position coach and passing game coordinator last year. So we might see a decent game from Mills, and if that happens, I think that means good things for everyone else in the Texans offense. Brandon Cooks, Nico Collins, Brevin Jordan, and Debro's guy, rookie running back Dameon Pierce.
Erickson, Friedman left you Jonathan Taylor. Do you want to talk about the number one player in most drafts?
Yeah, because Jonathan Taylor is going to treat you well if you drafted him number one overall, because he's taking on this Texans defense. 2 games last year against the Texans, averaged 144 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, good for 26 fantasy points per game. So I'm taking the over on his 22.5 points here on the Pick'em Challenge. So JT, for me, he was a no-brainer in redraft, and you're going to see it here in week 1.
Debro, how about you?
So look, I love Michael Pittman, and I'm higher on this passing attack for the Colts, but this could be a week to shy away from it. As hard as that is for me to say, if Jonathan Taylor has a day here, then Frank Reich just could take the air out of the ball, and we saw this last year. Michael Pittman versus Houston, he averaged 5.5 targets, 4 receptions, and 56 scoreless receiving yards per game. I mean, I like his matchup, and he destroyed zone coverage, which he's going to see a ton versus Houston this week. And I like Parris Campbell's matchup, because Desmond King in the slot last year was terrible. 73% catch rate, 115 passer rating in coverage. But if Jonathan Taylor destroys, Frank Reich could just say, you know what, we're good. We're just beating the crap out of you. We don't need to throw the ball. Let's just run it some more.
Next up, clearly the game of the week, Ravens at Jets. Erickson, tell me how many points the Ravens are going to win by.
Too many points, 14, 21. It's going to be by a lot, which is why I didn't do my key matchup as, Lamar versus the Jets, because it's pretty obvious what we know it's going to happen here. So I'm looking at the other side. I'm looking at Elijah Moore versus the Baltimore secondary, because everyone's coming back from Baltimore. You have Marcus Peters coming back, Marlon Humphrey, guys coming off of injuries now entering back into the lineup, and it's a scary secondary. For the most part, they have a lot of good pieces there, and that's going to shy people away from Elijah Moore, but I just think Elijah Moore is a straight baller. He's got that dog in him, as we've talked about on this show already multiple times. 24% target rate per route run last season. He was a wide receiver 2 overall and top 5 in fantasy points per game during his last stretch of 6 games played. And look, Joe Flacco started at quarterback. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, in one game last year with Joe Flacco as his QB, Elijah Moore, 8 catches, 141 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown against a pretty strong Miami Dolphins defense. And I also want to point out from Graham Barfield, friend over at Fantasy Points, 42 attempts for Joe Flacco last year, 13 went to Elijah Moore for a 31% target share. Chase volume here with Elijah Moore here for the New York Jets.
Yeah, and as somebody who did watch a lot of Joe Flacco over the years, when he has a favorite target, he will pepper them with targets. It appears that Elijah Moore, at least for that one game last year, was that guy in New York. Debro, what's your key matchup here?
So I'm going to go a little bit further down the rabbit hole and talk about some streamers. If you're in deeper leagues, 2 guys that stand out to me. I think the starting slot wide receiver for the Jets is going to be Braxton Berrios, and I'm really intrigued with him this week. Week 3 of the preseason, he was the guy, not Garrett Wilson, running with starters. So again, you need to be sitting Garrett Wilson, and I think if you're in a deep league, starting Berrios, because the matchup in the slot versus Kyle Fuller is the one chink in their armor. It is the one cornerback that they should be targeting religiously. Last year, 71% catch rate, 127 passer rating in coverage. This is where the Jets need to focus, and if it's not there, it should be Tyler Conklin. I think he's a fantastic streamer candidate this week. Baltimore was top 4 last year in receptions, receiving yards, and fantasy points per game allowed to tight ends, and Conklin played 95% of the snaps with Joe Flacco in week 3 of the preseason. So he's going to be the undisputed starter here. So I like both of them. If you're grasping for straws in deep leagues on, oh gosh, who do I start? These 2 guys make a lot of sense.
Friedman, where are you looking?
Well, right now I'm looking at your shirt with the Ravens mark right there. Very nice. This game really is the game of the week for you with the revenge spot of Joe Flacco. But I'm looking at the Ravens in this spot. Tight end Isaiah Likely and the Ravens running backs. Likely is basically a big slot receiver at tight end. He had 912 yards, 12 touchdowns as a senior last year. He tore up the preseason with 144 yards and a touchdown on 12 targets, which he turned in 12 receptions. He played with the first team offense. He could be the number 3 receiver for the Ravens. And the Jets last year were number 5 in most fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So very curious to see what we see out of Likely early in his career. And then this Ravens running back group. If J.K. Dobbins returns, how much is he used? I doubt he plays this week. And if that's the case, what does the backfield split look like between Mike Davis and Kenyon Drake? The Ravens are huge favorites. They like to run the ball. Fantasy points will be scored in that backfield. The question is, who is going to score them in week 1? And then what does that mean for any of the weeks that follow?
Boy, you never like to put too much stock into the preseason because it's easy to get suckered in, especially when it's a rookie tight end who was drafted in the 4th round. but he checked every single box you could have hoped for. Friedman, what is your key matchup for Game 9, Patriots at Dolphins?
Yeah, the big focus is obviously the Dolphins' offense with the moves that they made, but I'm going to look at the Patriots. I think this game comes down to their run offense versus the Dolphins' run defense. In our Fantasy Pros unit power rankings, we have the Patriots' offensive line in the top 10 and the defensive line for the Dolphins outside the top 20. I think the Patriots running backs have a significant edge over the Dolphins' front seven. And last year, the Pats, they were top 8 in most advanced rushing stats. The Dolphins' defense, they were average at best, and they could be worse this year without defensive-minded head coach Brian Flores, especially since he came from New England and really gave them an edge in their matchups against the Patriots. I think they could be missing that edge this year. And the Patriots, they've been a gap-heavy rushing team for years. And this offseason, beat reporters talked about how they struggled in training camp to implement a zone blocking scheme. Like, that's not great. But to me, this development doesn't mean that the Patriots are actually abandoning the power attack. I think it means that they're actually broadening what they do with their rushing attack. They're experimenting with it and adding to it because they want it to be more dominant, given that they know the rushing attack is the foundation of their offense. And this offseason, the Patriots, they did lose right guard Shaq Mason. They lost left guard Ted Karras, but otherwise they have good continuity on the offensive line. Trent Brown, David Andrews, Michael Onwenu, Isaiah Wynn, all of them have started multiple seasons for the team. And then they added first-round rookie left guard Cole Strange. Maybe he was overdrafted, but the dude was a mauling run blocker in college, and I think he slots in really well to this offensive line. You've got Damien Harris, Rhamondre Stevenson making up one of the best running back duos in the league, and the Dolphins are foundationally weak up the middle. Nose tackle Raekwon Davis last year had a 36.1 run defense grade per Pro Football Focus. I think both Harris and Stevenson could crush this week.
I'm sorry, really quickly, Friedman. You're like the draft guy, and you said maybe Cole Strange was overdrafted. I think that was pretty definitive. D-Bro, where are you looking in this game?
So Friedman's talking about the rushing attack. I'm going to go to the other side of the ball and tell you that Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert could explode this week. I mean, the Patriots were god-awful versus everything running backs last year. I mean, it wasn't pretty, guys. Highest yards after contact per attempt in the NFL allowed, 9th most rushing yards, and for two explosive rushers. I mean, Raheem Mostert was top 5 last time we saw him in breakaway run rate. Chase Edmonds was top 12 last year. If they're not getting it done on the ground, they can get it done in the passing game, because the Patriots were 29th in DVOA against receiving backs last year. So as much as we want to see Tua air the ball out, see this new reformed passing attack, which I know Erickson's going to talk about, the Dolphins just could keep the ball on the ground this week and just chew the Patriots up.
Erickson, what are you looking for in that revamped Dolphins passing attack?
Speed kills. Yeah, because the Patriots defensive backs are slow. Jalen Mills, Jonathan Jones both run 4.6s. Slot cornerback Miles Bryant is faster at 4.3 speed, but has the highest target rate per route covered among the 3 starting cornerbacks projected for the Patriots. So they lost J.C. Jackson, and I just don't think they're going to be able to keep up with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Tyreek Hill, if they're getting the ball in his hands very quickly, he doesn't need to be downfield. Tua doesn't need to throw balls down the field for him. I think they could get bubble screens for him, and I think it's going to be a long day for the Patriots secondary against the speed of Waddle and Tyreek Hill.
We are through the Sunday early afternoon slate, so let's move to the Sunday late afternoon slate. Game number 10 so far on our list, Raiders at Chargers. D-Bro, what's your key matchup?
Justin Herbert just tossing balls all day to his receivers against this Raiders secondary that is severely downgraded. Brandon Facyson, like Freeman talked about, is gone. So is Casey Hayward. Now you're going to see Amik Robinson starting in the slot, who is terrible. Allowed a 76% catch rate, 135 pass rating last year. And on the outside, it's not any better. And with we knowing that like Patrick Graham is there coordinating the defense, they're going to run a lot of zone again this year like they did last year for Gus Bradley. Mike Williams is going to rip them apart. Last year, he was 16th in yards per route run against zone, absolutely crushing corners just religiously. So I think this could be a massive day for not only Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, but Justin Herbert. And if you're picking between the two of them, Mike Williams is going to, I think this is really where he cements himself as the alpha for the Chargers.
Very quickly, Debro, do you think it trickles down to like Josh Palmer even?
I think Palmer can get on the action, but if you're looking at tertiary receiving options, then I really want a lot of action on Gerald Everett. For streaming options, the Raiders, again, zone-heavy defense. We see tight ends feast. We know Everett. I mean, just look at what Jared Cook did in this offense. If we think he's any better or more talented, he could have a really, really good day.
Erickson, I know you want to talk about Everett too.
Yeah, I like Gerald Everett. Mount Everett's about to go corrupt and go boom in this matchup. Patrick Graham is coming over from the New York Giants. New York allowed the most red zone targets to tight ends last season, so just part of the scheme. Just they're not trying to cover the tight end in this particular scheme that he's deploying here for the Chargers. Or for the Raiders, excuse me. So I think that Gerald Everett, if you need a tight end, George Kittle's out, Zach Ertz is questionable. Pick up Gerald Everett off the waiver wire. And then Josh Jacobs. Look, this Raiders offensive line is horrible. Alex Leatherwood, they released him, a former first-round pick. They're picking up guys off the street. It's a mess. And I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball effectively, even though the Chargers are a team that we usually attack for rushing purposes. Usually they don't try to stop the run, but they did add Austin Johnson, Khalil Mack, and Sebastian Joseph Day. So if the Chargers decide, hey, we are going to try to stop the run, they're probably going to be able to do it, and Josh Jacobs doesn't add enough as an explosive runner, potentially in a committee with Samir White, Amir Abdullah. Got concerns about Jacobs.
Friedman, where are you looking?
Yeah, for the Raiders, I'm looking at Davante Adams. He was someone I faded this offseason because there were always people willing to draft him in round one, and I just wasn't. But for this game, I want to see his target volume. I want to see where he lines up. Do they line him up in the slot sometimes? That's where he had a lot of success with Green Bay. Hunter Renfro's there. Do they let those two guys rotate in and out of the slot? But I think it could be a rough year for Adams investors, especially if he's not targeted near the goal line. We want to see that this week. But at least in week one, he won't be going against number one cornerback J.C. Jackson, who's expected to be out with an ankle injury. So that is good news for him. And also on the Charger side, I want to look at the backup running backs. Who is actually the number two back within this offense, and how much work does he take away from Austin Eckler? That is information I need to know.
Game 11, sticking with you, Friedman. Giants at Titans.
Yeah, I mean, let's continue the theme of me focusing on really disgusting matchups here. I'm focusing on this Giants secondary against the Titans pass catchers. Last year in week one, A.J. Brown, Julio Jones, Chester Rogers, Anthony Ferkser, those were the guys who led the Titans in targets. They are all gone. They've been replaced by Robert Woods, who's coming off of an ACL injury, Treylon Burks, who failed to distinguish himself in the preseason, Nick Westbrook-Akine, who is literally more name than game, and Austin Hooper, who has been a professional underwhelmer. In our Fantasy Pros unit power rankings, the Titans pass catchers are tied for number 30. They should be dead last, guys. Is the Giants secondary good? No, it's bad. This offseason, they lost starters in cornerback James Bradbury and safeties Logan Ryan and Jabril Peppers. But all five of the projected starters this year for the secondary were on the team in 2021, and they got meaningful playing time. So at least they have some continuity within the unit. And number one cornerback, Adoree Jackson, I think he's an underappreciated player. He's exhibited the ability to shadow receivers throughout his career. Unlike most perimeter cornerbacks, he actually does line up in the slot sometimes. So I think that gives new defensive coordinator Wink Martindale some flexibility with his coverages. And never has Jackson had a coverage grade lower than 65 per PFF. And last year, he outright dominated 0.61 yards per coverage snap, 4.98 yards per target. Like that puts him in like Jalen Ramsey, Jair Alexander territory. Like he's not in that tier with those guys, but like he is a very solid shadow capable cover man. And so if they can line him up against Woods or Burks on the perimeter, and then if the Giants can put some safety help over the other wide receiver, like Westbrook-Akine and Hooper, are they going to make the Giants pay? Probably not. So like two separate thoughts coming out of this. One, maybe this Giants secondary isn't as bad as people think, but then the second part of this Giants secondary is probably still bad. And if the Titans can't pass the ball against them, this passing game is in serious trouble for the entirety of the season.
Man, I hated pretty much every name that you just threw out there. This is not going to be a fun match. I can't believe this isn't an early afternoon slate. It seems like the exact type of game that we just like never see on Red Zone. Erickson, where are you looking for this one?
I'm looking at Saquon Barkley and Kadarius Toney here. Kadarius Toney, when we saw him last year, he flashed big play potential, target magnet when he was able to get the ball in his hands when he was healthy. And by all accounts, he should be healthy for this matchup. We'll find out if the Giants hate him or love him. by week 1. And if they love him, I love him in my fantasy lineup. So I'm going with Kadarius Toney. Then Saquon Barkley. Look, the Titans were obviously great against the run last year. They have lost some pieces. Harold Landry's out of the defensive line. They lost some linebacker talent. So I don't think it's as stingy as last year's numbers may indicate. But, you're not drafting Saquon Barkley because he's going to be an efficient rusher. You're hoping he rips off 1 or 2 big runs and gets usage in the passing game. And with Matt Breida as the primary backup there, I think Saquon Barkley's going to get a lot of volume.
Debro, talk to me about the other star running back in this matchup.
I mean, the big dog, I think, is going to eat in this matchup. The Giants were terrible versus the run. They didn't do anything in the offseason to counteract or improve in that aspect. So you're looking at a run defense versus Derrick Henry that was 31st and 23rd in adjusted line yards and second level yards, 6th in rushing yards and missed tackles. This all screams that, hey, if their wide receivers suck, they're just going to sit there and hand the ball off to Derrick Henry and say, all right, big man, just go maul some people. And look, if the wide receivers can't win their matchups, I do have, if you're in a pickle with George Kittle, if he's out and there's nobody to pick up in a deeper league, Austin Hooper, it could be gross. But what do we care about for tight ends? We care about routes. We care about playing time. And if all these other wide receivers suck, then Ryan Tannehill's got to throw the ball somewhere. If Hooper gets like in that 80% route per dropback territory, he could at least be a streamer-worthy idea in the back of your mind if George Kittle is out on your team.
Thankfully, that should be the last pretty ugly matchup that we have here on the rest of the slate. Game number 12, Chiefs at Cardinals. Erickson, what's the key matchup?
Ooh, I love this matchup here. I like the Chiefs wide receivers against this Arizona Cardinals secondary that honestly might be one of the worst in the NFL. Looking at Antonio Hamilton, Marco Wilson, Trayvon Mullen, and you're not even going to see Antonio Hamilton because he was gone in a cooking accident. Like, he's not even going to play, so they had to bring in Trayvon Mullen off the street. Marco Wilson was a 2021 fourth rounder who allowed the 3rd highest passer rating and coverage as a rookie. Trayvon Mullen is going to start in the perimeter. He led the NFL in highest average depth of target when targeted in 2021. So he can be beaten deep. And who does that play? Who does that cater to in this new look Chiefs wide receiver post Tyreek Hill offense? My guy Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I think we're always going to see games where MVS pops off and has a big game here or there. And in this specific matchup where you have Byron Murphy operating in the slot against Juju, I think that's the toughest matchup among the Arizona Cardinals versus these Chiefs wide receivers. So for me, I'm leaning on MVS to have a really big game here. And he's going to be at the top of every waiver wire article heading into week 2. You got to pick up MVS. And then he's obviously going to disappoint in week 2 because that's just kind of the MVS roller coaster that we all like to, or we have to ride sometimes here. So I'm looking forward to how this Chiefs wide receiver plays out here. I like MVS.
You must be this tall to ride the MVS roller coaster. Devro, there should be fantasy points aplenty in this one. Where are you looking?
I'm looking at both the backfields. I think that these are smash matchups for Clyde Edwards-Helaire and James Conner. If Mahomes and Kyler don't have massive games, it's because CEH and Conner do. And you look at what CEH did in his rookie season, I think that off the gallbladder, full off season, those things can come back for a rusher that was 17th in evaded tackles, 12th in breakaway runs, versus now a Cardinals rushing defense. Now, we hear that J.J. Watt is banged up, and they're still not good on the ground. 31st and 27th in second level in open field yards. I think this could be a smash performance for CEH. I think he's a high-end flex play this week. And James Conner, we're talking about Rondale Moore, the injury news comes out. He's getting an MRI on his hamstring, i.e. he's not playing this week. James Conner could get checkdowns for days, and a Kansas City run defense that was 29th in second level yards and 26th in DVOA versus pass catching backs could be checkdowns and rushing for days for Conner, and I love both of these backs.
Friedman, where are you looking in this one?
Yeah, so Erickson mentioned the Chiefs wide receivers. I'm looking at the wide receivers for the Cardinals. Rondale Moore looked primed for the slot role with DeAndre Hopkins out and Christian Kirk gone, but as Debro mentioned, he suffered a hamstring injury in practice. He's very likely to miss week 1. I think that's going to have a big impact on the offense, and I think that means a ton of targets could go to Marquise Brown, especially because tight end Zach Ertz is also dealing with a calf injury. He might be out. And man, if that happens, Hollywood, he's got the hashtag shower narrative college connection with quarterback Kyler Murray. He could go for 100 yards and a touchdown on 15 targets, like massive upside because of volume alone. And then the talent within that offense. And it seems like the Cardinals are always their best early in the year. So that might mean even better things for the passing game here. I think Hollywood is the guy who's going to capitalize on that because of all of the other injuries in that passing unit.
Final late afternoon game, NFC North rivalry matchup here. Packers at Vikings. Debro, what are you looking at?
Dalvin Cook show, baby. This Green Bay run defense has not been good, and people look at the box scores and they say, well, I mean, they allowed the 6th fewest rushing yards. Like, that's good, right? Well, they also faced the 3rd fewest rushing attempts in the NFL, and they were 28th in explosive run rate. Dalvin Cook has owned them in his last 3 full games. He's averaged 25 touches and 115 total yards and a score in every game. So I talked about him all draft season as the RB1, or at least the guy that I thought had the highest chance of it outside of CMC and Jonathan Taylor. Dalvin Cook is going to prove me right this week.
How do you feel about the Vikings offense in general? Like, you talked about Dalvin Cook's history against the Packers, but now that they have Kevin O'Connell in town, do you think it's going to look a little different in terms of how they use him against the Packers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be checkdowns, and especially they're going to play keep away from these cornerback units. So could be a lot of Dalvin Cook involved here and a lot of Irv Smith.
Erickson, what are you looking at for game 13?
Looking at A.J. Dillon, just kind of see how him and Aaron Jones and how their kind of roles shake out. Is it an extension of what we saw at the end of last year where A.J. Dillon was the red zone guy, like 32 red zone touches, ranked 3rd in the NFL? Is he the one vulturing rushing touchdowns where you have Aaron Jones lining up out wide and in the slot more as a receiver? So we're going to see a lot of both of these running backs, I think, but I really am interested to see if A.J. Dillon takes over as the main rusher, and I think that he can have an advantage in this matchup. Last year against the Vikings with Aaron Jones active, 83 yards from scrimmage on 16 touches with 2 rushing touchdowns to boot. So I think A.J. Dillon is interesting here. And then Irv Smith, just want to hit on him as well. Every down role, he should have that in this offense, but it's been a while since we've seen Irv Smith actually play football. He missed all the preseason with a thumb injury. He missed all of last season with a season-long ending injury. So I'm a little hesitant to just kind of throw him into my fantasy lineup because I want to see him play. I want to make sure he has that role, and I don't know where he's going to fall in the target pecking order with Thielen, with Jefferson, with KJ Osborne, who I like a lot.
Friedman, based on the notes, you have a number of different Packers that you're looking at this week.
Yeah, it's all about the Packers. And follow up on Erickson, he talked about A.J. Dillon. I'm looking at Aaron Jones and how much usage does he get without Davante Adams there? Do the Packers lean more on the running game? And if that happens, I think both Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon benefit. Do they give Jones more targets without Davante Adams there? We've seen the splits previously with Davante Adams, around 3.5 targets per game. Without Davante Adams, like 6.5 targets per game. Obviously, that's not going to extend into this season, like with that kind of discrepancy, but do they still shift some of those targets over to Aaron Jones? Is he the focal point of the offense? So that's Aaron Jones. And then I gotta say, without Davante Adams, quarterback Aaron Rodgers has to throw to someone. And I'm looking at 2 veterans, of course, going to keep it disgusting. Looking at 2 veterans who are on waivers in a lot of leagues. Pick them up. Sammy Watkins and Randall Cobb. They are starters. They will be on the field, and Allen Lazard might be out with an ankle injury this week. And if that happens, I think that means all the more targets are going to flow to Watkins and Cobb. Watkins will never be healthier than he is in week 1. And he has a history of going off in season openers. And then Cobb is Mr. Reliable for Rodgers. It's nasty, but both of these guys are undervalued.
I was going to ask quickly, is this going to be one of those classic Sammy Watkins week 1 games?
Oh,
yeah. The most Sammy Watkins thing ever is 5 catches, 120 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then devastation for the rest of the year.
Week 1
I
Hall
look
of Famer.
forward to seeing it. We're moving to Sunday Night Football, game 14 on the slate. Buccaneers at Cowboys. Erickson, what's the key matchup here?
I'm looking at Mike Evans versus Trevon Diggs. I really want to see if the Buccaneers and Tom Brady, if they do what they did last time we saw them play the Cowboys, where, Trevon Diggs kind of locked up Mike Evans. Like, Trevon Diggs gave up the most receiving yards of any cornerback last year, but in this particular matchup, he actually played pretty well against Mike Evans. The big body type fits more with what Trevon Diggs does well as a cornerback systematically. So, and that opens up opportunities for other players in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers passing game to eat. Now, we have question marks about Chris Godwin, about Russell Gage, and whether those guys are going to be active and playing. But if they are upright, I think that we're going to see more of the targets end up flowing their way. Just referring back to the Evans-Diggs matchup from last year, he held him to just 3 catches for 24 yards on 6 targets. And then in Diggs, when Diggs was in primary coverage, just caught 1 of 3 balls for 10 yards. So I think that we could see a big game from one of these secondary Buccaneers pieces, and I know Friedman is excited about one in particular.
Yeah, Friedman, I'll throw it to you then. What are you looking at here?
Oh, baby. Yeah, I hope I hope what Erickson outlined there comes to pass, because that means we could get a lot of targets going to Julio Jones. I lit the internet on fire in July when I said that I would draft Julio ahead of Allen Robinson. We'll see how Julio does in week one, but so far the cheese stands alone, right? Julio is an injury risk, no question about that, but he is healthy now. Over the past 2 years, he has an elite 10.4 yards per target in his 13 games with 50% of snaps. He has 1,000 yards on 101 targets in that time frame. I think he's still Julio Jones. I think he goes out there and has a Julio Jones type of game with the best quarterback he's ever had in his career in Tom Brady. And then on the other side of the ball, it'd be easy to say, hey, I want to see what Ezekiel Elliott does. No, Tony Pollard. And I'm saying this as the Cowboys fan, right? Tony Pollard. Does he look better than Zeke this week? How much usage does he get? The Cowboys are thin at wide receiver. So do they give Pollard some snaps in the slot? Everything with Pollard, I'm here for. He has the potential to be an RB1 in this league. He's blocked because of Zeke, but I just want to see him start to get more usage within that offense.
Debro, which matchups are you keeping an eye on?
If Dak Prescott's not peppering CeeDee Lamb with targets or targeting Tony Pollard, which I'm with Friedman on that, I think he gets a lot of targets this week. It's going to be the Dalton Schultz show. And versus a Tampa Bay defense that's a lot of zone. We've seen that last year. 63 to 67% of their outside corner snaps were zone coverage. Everybody talks about Dalton Schultz is not hyper athletic. He can't beat man coverage. I don't care. And I don't care in this matchup because Tampa runs a ton of zone and Schultz was 7th in yards per route run against zone coverage last year. All this means is that Schultz could walk away from week one as a top 3 tight end. And if Mike Evans is locked up on the outside, it could just be a lot of Uncle Lenny. Let's just go, Leonard Fournette. I mean, the conditioning's back. He's looking like svelte Lenny, at least right now. And versus the Cowboys last year, look, you could run on the Cowboys. As good as their cornerbacks were, you could get past this defense on the ground. They were 19th in second level yards, 21st in explosive run rate. And when you get inside the 20, they were 30th in red zone rush defense. So this could be a spot where we see Fournette dive in for 2 touchdowns.
Just quick aside, NFL, please, next season, week 1, Sunday Night Football. Can we not get an NFC East team in the matchup, please? I'm so tired of seeing it's always either the Eagles, Giants, Cowboys, one of them, every single week 1.
It's too bad. It's too bad. It's too bad it can't be the Ravens every Sunday Night Football night.
Thank you.
Too bad.
That's all I heard. I was like, all Ryan said there was, I want to see Baltimore play.
Hey, Baltimore played Sunday Night Football last season against the Chiefs, and it was one of the games of the year. So
there you go.
In the pudding.
Chiefs.
Let's move to Monday Night Football. Our last game on the slate: Broncos at Seahawks. Another revenge game here. Debro, what matchup are you looking at?
It's the Denver rushers against the Seattle run defense. Seattle was elite on the ground at stopping the run last year. They were top 8 in basically every metric that I care about. The lowest explosive run rate allowed in the NFL. If one of these running backs is going to have a good day, it's going to have to be through the air. And I think I give the lean to Javonte Williams there last year. He was better in yards per route run, although the routes were split between these two guys. That's where they're going to have to make their money and get the fantasy points is through the air, because Seattle was horrific versus receiving backs. 32nd in the DVOA. They were the last defense. You have to go all the way back to 2007 for the Detroit Lions to find a defense in the NFL that has allowed over 1,000 receiving yards to running backs in a year. That was Seattle last year. So Javonte just could get there on checkdowns.
Friedman, what are you looking at in this matchup?
For the Seahawks, I'm looking at Rashad Penny. It looks like rookie running back Ken Walker will miss week 1 with the hernia, so Penny could get a lot of usage. For me, the questions are, do the Seahawks keep the score close enough to let Penny get to 20 carries? And even if they don't, do the Seahawks just keep on running the ball anyway, because that's what they do? I think we could see a pretty decent game out of Penny, even though you wouldn't expect it in an offense that's going to be really bad. For the Broncos, I'm looking at tight end Albert Okwuegbunam. Nailed it. Maybe. I don't know. I'm curious to see how much usage he actually gets without Noah Fant, who is now on the Seahawks, how much he gets, in terms of snaps and routes without rookie tight end Greg Dulcich. Is Albert O an every down player? And how often does he need to block versus run a route for this team? He has sky-high upside with his athleticism and efficiency. Is he going to get more targets? That's the big question for him. I hope we see it in this game.
Yeah, to be clear, when I said revenge game, I didn't mean Noah Fant against the Broncos. None of you guys have mentioned Russell Wilson yet. Erickson, are you looking at Russell Wilson?
I'm coming to the rescue to kind of tie a bow on this great show here. So Russell Wilson in the 2 wide receivers, Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy. I can't think of a better way to end week 1 with Courtland Sutton coming down with 2, maybe even 3 touchdowns, because they're going to dial up the pass game in the red zone here. You look at Russell Wilson, he's generated a Seattle wide receiver to be top 5 in end zone targets over the past 3 seasons. Nathaniel Hackett with the Green Bay Packers the last 2 seasons, top 5 in terms of passing touchdown rate. If you don't think that they're going to let Russell Wilson throw freaking touchdowns against his old team, you're out of your mind. And you know where they're going to? Courtland Sutton. So I love Sutton in this matchup. My call of Courtland Sutton being this year's Cooper Cup will start to come to fruition. Cannot wait for it. And even Jerry Jeudy, I think he's in a solid spot as well. 21% target rate for Jeudy last season shows that he at least can command targets. And having Russell Wilson should at least make sure, okay, we have targets. Now we can turn them into actual production because you have accurate targets now. So rookie Tariq Woolen is supposed to start for the Seattle Seahawks, and I'm pretty sure the only reason he was drafted was because of his athletic speed. He runs a sub 4.3, but the dude is still super, super raw. So route running with Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, he's going to be looking the other way, wondering where the heck are these Denver Broncos wide receivers? Oh, there they are, catching touchdowns from Russ.
Erickson is in victory lap season before the game has even been played. He said 3 touchdowns, so I'm going to give an impromptu final over-under challenge here. Friedman, over-under 3 touchdowns for Sutton.
I mean, if we set it at 1.5, I would still be taking the under. If it's 2.5, I am leveraging everything that I own and putting it on the under. At 3, given that I have the opportunity for a push, yeah, I'm taking the under.
That man said 3 touchdowns.
No. He said maybe even 3. Good hedge there.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's wrap it up there, fellas. A fast-paced show. We got a ton of information in there for you. Thank you both, for all 3 of you, for another awesome episode. Everybody listening, please remember to check out the Autopilot tool this season and also to check out BetMGM and Air Medcare Network. Thank you, the fans, for listening. For Friedman and Erickson and Debro and Courtland Sutton, I'm Ryan Wormley. We'll see you again soon.